More than any other technical design or social institution, the railway stands for modernity. No competing form of transport, no subsequent technological innovation, no other industry has wrought or facilitated change on the scale that has been brought about by the invention and adoption of the railway. Try to think of a world before the railway and the meaning of distance and the impediment it imposed. Think of the limits placed on economic activity and human life chances by the impossibility of moving food, goods and people in large numbers or at any speed in excess of 10 miles per hour. Of the enduringly local nature of all knowledge, whether cultural, social or political, and the consequences of such compartmentalization. Of all the technological advances of the 19th century, few captured the imagination like the railway locomotive. These steam-powered puffing devils heralded a new era of transportation, where people could travel quickly and comfortably to previously unimagined destinations, and goods could be delivered in much greater quantities for increased profit. Writer John Ruskin observed the rapid pace of change taking place in his native Britain. Along the iron veins that traverse the frame of our country beat and flow the fiery pulses of its exertion, hotter and faster every hour. But not everyone was enamoured with the train's grip on the 19th century imagination. That devilish iron horse, whose ear-rending neigh is heard throughout the town, has muddied the boiling spring with his foot, and he it is that has browsed off all the woods on Walden shore, that Trojan horse, with 1,000 men in his belly, introduced by mercenary Greeks. Where is the country's champion, the Moor of Moor Hall, to meet him at the deep cut and thrust an avenging lance between the ribs of the bloated pest? Demanded naturalist Henry Thoreau. Nevertheless, the locomotive was here to stay, and rail lines sprawled across continents. In 1830, there was only about 75 miles of railroad track in the United States. Within 10 years, that figure had exploded to almost 2,800 miles. With names like John Bull, Old Ironsides, and General Haupt, locomotives chugged across the American continent, opening the West, encouraging migration, and showing people a world beyond their town or city. At first, America imported British engines, but the nation soon established its own thriving locomotive industry. By 1880, it was producing more than 1,000 trains a year. Developed as a prototype in 1830, Tom Thumb was the first American-built steam locomotive used on a common carrier railroad. Its vertical boiler included boiler tubes made from rifle barrels. In 1914, around the same time the Trans-Siberian was finished, Californians celebrated the opening of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. The line was a joint venture between Southern Pacific Railroad and Santa Fe Railroad, so the companies could share in the lucrative revenues flowing from a connection to the redwood lumber mills around Humboldt Bay. Construction workers laid sleepers through some of the most rugged Pacific Northwest countryside, blasting tunnels through mountain ranges and building railway bridges over foaming gorges. A huge crowd gathered to welcome the first train passing through the towns of Willits, Cane Rock, Arcata, and Eureka in October 1914. But the railway had already suffered early problems, with a large section of track washed away in a flood before the official opening. And after the celebrations, a number of dignitaries were stranded when a landslide blocked the line to Eureka. But for the townsfolk celebrating their new railway line, the Northwestern Pacific meant jobs, connection to civilization, and the prospect of a bright future. The railroad was christened, with California wine wrapped in an American flag. It was a moment of patriotic pride and great optimism. The dignitaries included federal and state politicians, as well as representatives of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, and the moment was captured on film to be preserved for posterity. The same year, the Redwood Empire Special was christened at a special ceremony in Sacramento. Popular California Governor Sonny Jim Rolfe engineered the start. The governor was a wealthy businessman who was adored by Californians for his down-to-earth manner and reputation for getting the job done. On the railways, the job was getting giant steam trains onto the tracks. Trains that could transport huge shipments of lumber. The Redwood Empire Special hauled 117 cars bearing 3 million feet of California redwood to be delivered to 21 states. Giant Southern Pacific engines haul 9.175-ton cargo over the Sierra, the longest and heaviest train ever taken over the hill in one block. Colonial powers consolidated their control by building railway lines that could transport soldiers and guns across continents. Germany stretched a rail link from Berlin to Baghdad, a politically explosive project that benefited the Ottoman Empire at the expense of the British and French. The British in turn set up railway companies in India and Africa to link the far-flung regions of its empire into rail networks. The most remote and exotic parts of the globe became accessible. Journalist Edward Arnold said in 1865, "Railways may do for India what dynasties have never done. They may make India a nation." Lahore railway station was a symbol of this optimism. Costing 500,000 rupees to build, its foundation stone was laid in 1859, and it still stands today. Built in the years immediately following the Indian Mutiny, the structure was designed to function as both railway station and a fort. Russia, another great empire, also linked its principalities to a railway system. In 1891, it began construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway, a major arterial line designed to connect feeder lines across the Caucasus and Central Asia. The project cost almost 1.5 billion rubles, and workers at both ends started construction at the same time, working in tandem towards the middle. The Shinkansen, a sleek, futuristic speeding bullet that symbolizes the Japanese love of modernity and efficiency.
It runs on rail lengths a mile long, on which it has reached 150 miles an hour on a trial run. Even then, it wasn't flat out. On regular runs between Tokyo and Osaka, nearly 500 miles, the bullet will keep the speed needle steady at 190 kilometers, about 120 miles an hour. Even with 5 stops, it cuts the journey time to 4 hours. With their sense of timing, the Japs will have a small fleet of these 1,000-passenger trains when all the world's in Tokyo for the Olympic Games.
Shinzi Sogo, president of Japan National Railways, which operates the trains, was present for a speed trial in the 1960s that saw the Shinkansen reach a record-breaking 256 kilometers an hour. The diesel engine streamliner passed all its tests with flying colors. The Bullet was the first standard gauge train built in Japan. It was developed as a response to the pressures modern life had brought to Japan. a burgeoning population that was concentrated in the big cities and relatively close distances. Another great achievement, this train is called Maglev, which stands for magnetic levitation, a wheelless vehicle on a magnetic track driven by electrical linear motors. This method has the potential to be faster and quieter than most conventional trains, potentially reaching speeds comparable to turboprop and jet aircraft. Maglev is cheap to run and maintain, having almost no moving parts to go wrong. Powerful magnets underneath each car keep it balanced and floating above the rail. The powerful electromagnets fitted under the Maglev car are fully computerized. Automatic electronic control maintains a constant air gap between magnet and rail, compensating all the time for variations in passenger loading. At speeds of up to 430 kilometers per hour, the test ride traveled the 30-kilometer stretch to the Shanghai district Pudong in just 8 minutes.
Just amazing. Nothing prepares you for it. And immediately you think, if you ran one of these from London past Birmingham and Manchester and then up to Scotland, you could get up from London to Glasgow or Edinburgh in, I suppose, something like an hour and a quarter, an hour and 20 minutes. It's about the only thing that would actually get people out of domestic flights.
On August the 8th, 1963, Britain's most famous robbery took place on the Royal Mail train, the Glasgow to London travelling post office. The operation to steal millions of pounds in used, unmarked bills was planned with precision and carried out with unparalleled daring. The thieves targeted the second carriage from the front, where valuables, mostly cash, were stored. Usually the train only carried about £300,000, but because it had been a bank holiday weekend in Scotland, the coffers had swelled to about £2.3 million. The overnight train left Glasgow on Wednesday night. At 3 the next morning, driver Jack Mills had just passed Leighton Buzzard when he saw a red light signalling him to stop at Sears Crossing. The train came to a halt. What Mills didn't realise was that the signal had been rigged by stuffing a glove over the green light and attaching a 6-volt battery to the red. Co-driver David Whitby got out of the train to see what the problem was. He discovered the railway communications cable had been cut. But before he could get back into the train, he was attacked, handcuffed, and thrown down the embankment. In view of the robbery, British Railways rulebook was later amended to prohibit drivers from leaving the cab when they encountered a red light. Meanwhile, one of the robbers entered the cabin and knocked Jack Mills unconscious. Although no one was seriously hurt, the experience shook the victims badly. It didn't take long for police to track down the thieves' hideout, and the gang was soon on the run. In 1964, 13 men were sent to jail for a total of 307 years for carrying out Britain's notorious Great Train Robbery. But just 4 months later, Charlie Wilson broke out in an escape as daring as the robbery itself. A gang of men on the outside stole a builder's ladder to scale the walls of the mental hospital that lay next to the prison and freed Wilson and 3 other prisoners from their cells using a master key. A huge manhunt was launched to find the fugitives, but it took police 3 years to track Wilson down to his hiding place in Canada. Great Train robber Ronnie Biggs was similarly disinclined to serve out his sentence and plotted an escape that was to prove more successful than Wilson's. He escaped to Paris, Australia, and then to Brazil. Biggs forged a new life in Rio, becoming a tourist attraction for Britons. In 1999, he invited more than 100 people to celebrate his 70th birthday in style. But Biggs's health was fading fast after a series of strokes, and in 2001 he returned to Britain, where he was sent back to jail to serve the remainder of his sentence. As well as luxury and romance, train travel has led to some tragic accidents. In 1943, there was devastation when a train derailed in Nuremberg, Germany. Railways were at capacity during war operations, leading to a number of fatal accidents.
7 persons were injured when a passenger train plowed into a derailed locomotive near Lancaster, Pennsylvania during a blinding snowstorm. The crash occurred before tracks could be cleared following an earlier derailment. Winter adds its hazards to America's war-burdened railroads.
The following year, disaster struck Britain's railways near Durham.
Another post-war disaster strikes Britain's railways. The fast London-Newcastle Express crashed into a freight train with a cost of 10 lives and many injured. Sleeping coaches are splintered and piled 20 feet high. The death toll was considered miraculously low, considering that the crowded train carried 400 passengers. The wreck was the third to be visited on British railways within a 7-day period. Soldiers join wrecking crews in probing the tangled wreckage. England's fine safety record suffers a grievous blow.
Frogmen were sent into a freezing lake to search for crash victims following a train derailment in Sweden in 1958. The train left the track about 100 yards from Halterfors station and plunged into a nearby lake. For 48 hours in sub-zero conditions, the frogmen checked and double-checked the wrecked train for crash victims, but found nothing. The final casualty list stood at 20 passengers injured, an amazingly small figure in view of the damage sustained by the Gothenburg-Borås Express. Swedish railway officials concluded that the accident was caused by a fault in the lines, possibly due to the intense cold prevalent at the time. The same year, a mountain train plunged into a valley in West Germany. The train started its downward journey from the 1,053-foot-high station towards the Rhine. Suddenly, one coach lurched and plunged from the track, smashing its way down the mountainside. Flowers hurled from the train as it gathered speed on its death plunge showed how the day started. The body stretched out under the trees told how it ended. In 1966, commuters got a fright when 2 carriages of Chicago's overhead railway system left the rails and plunged 10 meters onto the street below. 1 man was killed and at least 25 people were injured. The accident occurred during a rainstorm as the elevated train traveled above Indiana Avenue. It slipped off the rain-slicked tracks and crashed down on the street below. The accident stopped the morning rush hour traffic on the line, and tens of thousands of commuters were trapped in trains elsewhere along the route. The grand aim of indulgent rail travel is the famous Orient Express. At its peak, steaming across pre-war Europe, the original Orient Express inspired more thrillers than any other train in the world. From Graham Greene to Agatha Christie, novelists told of its legendary high living and low deeds. It was the Orient that made the train so famous in the realms of fact and fiction. It ran across Europe from Paris to the Balkans and Turkey. But the Express was the setting for stories of intrigue, adventure, and mystery. The fascination was that the films and novels owed something to real events. Bodies occasionally did fall from carriages, and each station promised romance for strangers who met on the train. As train travel declined in Europe during the post-war years, Orient Express services were dropped. Sadly, the train stopped running to Paris. Air travel and delays and restrictions at some East European frontiers were given as reasons for the Express ending. The first Orient Express pioneered the idea of crossing Europe by rail and eating and sleeping in comfort. The original Orient Express made its inaugural journey on October 4, 1883, transporting about 40 very important persons in style from Paris to Romania. The first 6 years were adventurous. Passengers had to navigate perilous open catwalks between cars. In the 1890s, travellers got off the Orient Express at a tiny Danube town and took ferry boats across the river into Bulgaria. From there, a train took them to the Black Sea port, where another boat took them to Constantinople. But by 1889, Paris and Constantinople were connected, and it took 67 hours 35 minutes to make the transcontinental journey. Soon other versions of the Orient Express came into being, but none captured the imagination like the original. The heyday of the Orient Express was at the turn of the century. Later, during the 1920s, tales of murder, mystery and espionage grew around it. An extension to the railway line was started in 1906 with the building of the Simplon Tunnel, which enabled the train to travel as far as Milan, Venice and Trieste. From Italy, it would then steam as far as Istanbul. In 1982, the Venice Simplon Orient Express was revamped to run twice weekly from Calais to Venice. The Pullman cars were refurbished and restored to original condition. In 1988, the service set a world record for the longest train journey ever made. The express travelled from France to Hong Kong non-stop. But despite its popularity and mystique, many countries dropped the Orient Express from their schedules. However, the far-seeing Swiss cashed in by running a commemorative Orient Express from Zurich using original carriages. Platform entertainment reinforced the period atmosphere. This specially run train, which King Boris himself used to drive across his Balkan kingdom, preserves all the old comforts, from the splendour of the sleeping berths to the pride of the service, the luxurious dining cars. Here, long ago, is where the crown heads mixed with captains of industry and secret agents dallied with femme fatales. On this trip, anyone can be anyone. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements.